Heard the story about the gravity car replica that we have here. This was a project that we started actually in the late 80s and completed it in 1990. And it's pretty close to an exact replica from the best we could figure out from pictures and photographs. The actual wheels and suspension system underneath are authentic. They were actually from a gravity car that we found in someone's backyard. And so we salvaged that much of it. And then we got a really good landscape architect to put together detailed drawings of how to construct it. And we had a couple service clubs, the Lions Club and Rotary, both help in actually constructing the physical vehicle. All of these were unique. And so each one that's numbered is actually very different. They were all built locally, mostly in the local barn up in Blythedale Canyon, and some were, I guess, actually ordered out. But they improved them over the years, and you can see going from one to the next, they have some unique differences in each one of them. This is actually supposed to be number 9. When it was vandalized in Old Mill Park and repainted, all they could see was the very top of the curve of the number on the front, and they thought it was 8, so they put an 8 on it. But in any case, we will get it re-signaled back to number 9 in the near future, at least next time it gets painted. So we wanted very much to thank the people that participated in helping build the car. Unfortunately, since we're kind of 22 years after the fact, we're not all still with us, but some of us are around. I sent out emails to try and round up as many as we could. But we'll see who is going to be who is here today. But I do have a proclamation that I'd like to read that kind of talks a little bit about the people that were involved in their various roles. So, whereas the Mill Valley City Council wishes to dedicate the gravity car replica to signify the historic importance of the gravity car and the crookedest railroad in the world to Mill Valley's rich history, and wishes to thank the volunteers who helped construct it. And whereas the gravity cars were individually unique rail cars that coasted with just a brakeman from the top of Mount Tamalpais to Muir Woods and to Mill Valley Depot from 1902 to 1929. And whereas the gravity car replica was built in 1990 by a team of community volunteers led by Mill Valley Mayor and the City Council, and was subsequently moved to the Depot Plaza in 2009. And whereas Ted Worm and Al Graves, the authors of the book Crookedest Railroad in the World, provided historic knowledge and authentic gravity car wheels and suspension for the replica. And whereas Robert Smith, a former gravity brakeman, provided detailed drawings and colors for the car, and Bill Provines, a former locomotive fireman, provided first-hand insights. And whereas landscape architect Ralph Alexander analyzed the drawings and numerous historic photographs in order to develop detailed construction blueprints. And whereas Mill Valley Lumber donated the lumber, Goodman's Building Supply donated construction materials, and Ed Dill of Dill Plumbing fabricated the metalwork. And whereas the Mill Valley Lions Club, under the direction of Roy Carlson, constructed the wood car, and Rotary Club of Mill Valley, under the direction of Chuck Waldron, painted it. And whereas Chip Patton of Patton Construction helped restore the gravity car after it was vandalized in Old Mill Park in 2008. Now, therefore, I, Gary Lyon, Mayor of Mill Valley, dedicate the gravity car replica on this 25th day of August 2012, and gratefully acknowledge the above-named individuals, service clubs, local businesses, and other volunteers who contributed to this historic project. So, thank you. Is anyone here that I named? I see Chuck Waldron right down here. Chuck, can you come up and please take a copy of this?
Chip Pat, he's shy.
Chip, come on.
All right, get up there, Chip.
Thank you very much for contributing. All of the materials and work and so forth that went in this was completely donated. Is anyone else able to be with us today? No, well, that's too bad. Okay, well, as I said, I wanted to introduce Fred Runner, who's a railroad historian, to talk a little bit about what's going on the top of the mountain and what their activities have been.
Thanks, Gary. So I'll just stand down here on ground level. I'm Fred Runner. I'm the historian of the crookedest railroad in the world. I'm here with a handful of other volunteers from our little museum up on East Peak. We call it the Gravity Car Barn. Arlene Halligan was the driving force behind getting the museum built. Thank you, Arlene. We have a handful of other docents that are here, Michael, and we got Scott and Fred Cadoni. Our news today is more news about the crookedest railroad. It's about this engine, engine number 9, which is the last engine that was ever bought by the crookedest railroad. It was the newest, biggest, most powerful engine that was ever on Mount Tam, and it happens to be the only thing left. So for a long, long time, we've been trying to find a way to bring it back to Mill Valley or to Mount Tam. It's because it's a wonderful, it's the only piece that's left of the crookedest railroad. So last month in June, actually last month would have been July, the month before that in June, Marlene and I went up to Scotia to speak to the people of the town of Scotia to see about the possibility of bringing the engine back. I told them, we introduced ourselves, and I said that I had been anointed as the historian of the crookedest railroad, that Ted Worm, who wrote the book and helped build the gravity car here, gave me his files before he passed away. Said, I'm passing the torch to you, which was a thrill and a chore. It's been a really a fun thing for years. Anyway, in going through Ted's files, I found a story that was written in 1953 about the crookedest railroad. It's a one-page story that was in Trains magazine promoting the book that he's about to publish. That was going to be called The Crookedest Railroad in the World, telling the story of Mill Valley and Mount Tamalpais and all the people that came through here for 33 years before the railroad was scrapped. And in fact, 3 days ago, August 22nd, was the 116th anniversary of the free train that the railroad offered to the people of Mill Valley. Took them from just across Throckmorton all the way to the top of the mountain and brought them back down so they could see what they'd been hearing, the bangs and the booms and all the noise that had been going on for 6 months before that. Was a free ride in August 22nd, 1896. Anyway, so Ted wrote this one-page story, and at the end of it he says the only thing that's left is this engine, and it belongs to a company called Dolbear and Carson. They've just been bought by Pacific Lumber. He was trying to encourage somebody to buy it so that it wouldn't get scrapped. He had actually been part of a deal that the Chamber of Commerce in Mill Valley was considering buying it, bringing it down here and putting it at the depot. Maybe, we don't know where they were going to put it. Somewhere in the correspondence, Ted indicates the deal fell apart, doesn't know why. This story's printed in June 1953 with a note to the publisher saying, you know, the deal's falling apart, I'm not sure that that's going to happen. The publisher says, well, maybe if we can publish this story, maybe the interest will be rekindled and they can bring the engine back to Mill Valley. Well, that doesn't happen, obviously, because there's no engine here. But in October, Pacific Lumber buys the engine, and they put it on display in the town of Scotia. And so what I told the people in Scotia in June was, this is the beginning of a long collaboration between the people who love Mount Tamalpais and the people of Scotia, saving this engine because it's got such a great story. So the next part of the story has to do with Howard Folker. Many of you may know Howard. He lived here all his life. His father was an engineer on the railroad. Howard's wife is here, Ernie. Hi, Ernie. So Ernie came down to be with us today. A couple years ago, we grabbed Howard to find out his story, which is this wonderful story. Howard's dad was the engineer on the railroad. At the age of 6 in 1929, as the railroad was running the last trains, he knew the big guys on the railroad. It's a real thrill for a 6-year-old boy. He knew Jake Johnson, who was the head engineer. He knew Bill Thomas, the guy that invented the gravity cars. When they saw Howard on the streets in Mill Valley, they'd say, Howard, how are you? They'd shake his hand. And it was, you know, Howard thought he was pretty cool stuff because, you know, hey, I know these big guys, they're really important. Occasionally, Jake would ask Howard to help oil the engine. So he would give him an oil can, and the oil can was kind of big and heavy. And he'd run around with the little cups on the engine and fill them up with oil. And at one point, Howard found a smaller oil can that he wound up using, and Jake saw him with that, and he said, you like that oil can? And Howard says, well, yeah, because my 6-year-old hands, you know, can actually hold this thing. The other one's so big, it's hard to hold. And Jake says, great. He says, you can have it. He says, I hate that thing. So Howard kept the oil can his whole life. And Howard gave us the oil can. I wrote a book about the railroad. He gave us the oil can and he said, you know, I've had this my whole life. It's got this wonderful patina of grease and oil and sawdust on the outside of it because it stayed in the shop for years. He said, you know, all my life I wondered what I was going to do with this thing. Now that you've written this book and you have this little museum at the top of the mountain, I know exactly where it needs to go. So right now we're working on a display that will include the oil can as part of it. Anyway, Howard had a front row seat to watching the railroad be scrapped in 1930. They lived in Blackdale Canyon, just across the creek from where the shops were. And Howard remembered fondly Sunday mornings hearing the hisses and the dings and the banging of metal as the engines were warmed up and were ready for the day's work. It was a really exciting time for him. So he watched the last trains run in 1929. In 1930, the railroad was scrapped, and having this wonderful front row seat sitting right across the creek from the shops, he watched the scrappers bring the passenger cars into Mill Valley, into the turn there at the shops. They toppled the passenger cars into the creek there at the shops, poured fuel on them and lit them on fire. He said that they burned for a month as they destroyed every one of the passenger cars. He didn't see them destroy the gravity cars, but presumably that was what they did as well. The idea was to burn away all the wood. Whatever metal parts were left over were then scooped out of the creek and sent off to the scrappers for scrap value. They got $15,000 for the whole railroad when they were done. Anyway, the thing I told the people in Scotia was, Howard watched all this get destroyed. This is the only thing that's left, and that's why we come to you, because this is all that's left. And as a museum that cares about this story, this is really a touchstone for us. It's the great thing that helps us understand what that was about. So, after we finished, Arlene and I talked to the people of the town of Scotia, and the president of the Community Services District said, I used to climb on that engine when I was a boy. I've known this in the middle of town my whole life, but tonight you changed my mind. So we should talk about this. And so we've begun the conversation of bringing engine number 9 back to Mount Tam. It's a trip that would bring it from Scotia to Sacramento to the Railroad Museum there for restoration, and then ultimately up the mountain and put on display there. And there's a lot of things we have to work out. We have money we've got to raise. But to have a gravity car here, have the depot here, and some of these pieces that were part of this once famous railroad that everybody that rode on it enjoyed is a really great thing. And we'll look forward to seeing if we can recruit some of you to help us out when the time comes to bring number 9 back to the mountain. So that's my story, and thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Fred. Do you want to pass a hat, or are you going to? No, not too early to do that. Let's make sure we get it coming back. I want to thank you all for coming today and participating with us in this dedication. I noticed the sun's finally coming out, so there will be a concert starting on the square here in a matter of 20 minutes or so. So please stick around and enjoy yourself this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.